One of the first questions we often get is how can you rely on these metric values here? You see it along the top of the dashboard. You'll see it across our platform. We talk about it in our posts on social. And I wanted to discuss that a little bit. My name is Anthony. I'm one of the founders of Univrs. I thought through the workflows and created a lot of the way that we calculate this stuff. So I wanted to address it since it's a common question that comes up. So if we go through this top row here, I want to say that you say estimated revenue opportunity, total projected risk to ARR. This could be LTV, it could be revenue, it could be account size, realized lost ARR in this case, potential conversion gains, and then you see NPS over here. All of these are calculated to sort of at the company level, the product level, the theme level, the sub-theme, and then the user need insights, the specific user needs that are expressed, whether that's in a survey, in a sales call, or in interviews, in voice of customer work, whatever that comes from. We're looking at those all across the different tiers of hierarchy, because you're getting to greater levels of abstraction as you go from those specific user needs up to the company level is the most abstracted, of course. So I want to talk about this. So potential conversion gains is actually from sales calls and currently. So we're doing an assessment of that conversation. We're seeing how much do we think that this particular negative inflection point in a conversation had to do, how much did that have to do with the lack of conversion for a particular potential customer, right? So we're saying we're only looking at calls and transcripts from people that did not convert. And then we're saying, all right, the user initially said in the middle of a conversation, do you have feature XYZ? And the sales rep said, well, we don't, but we're working on something that might fit the bill for you, and the customer said, well, it's okay, it's more of a nice to have. We're not going to ascribe much of the value of what they would have paid if they converted to that user need. But if right at the end of the conversation, you have this exchange where the customer says, all right, so what's this going to set me back? And the sales rep says $50,000. And the customer says, that's too rich for my blood. I can't budget that. Well, now we're going to be able to say, all right, the call ended immediately after that. And it was a reaction that indicated that was the deal breaker. So a lot more of that $50,000 estimate is going to be ascribable to that pricing as the problem. And it's going to focus you on the pricing in that case. That's an obvious one, but that's the sort of thing we do. Realized lost ARR here in the middle. We're looking at people that churn. So whether you're sending us that field in from the CRM, whether we are looking at the account size and seeing that it drops to 0 for a certain duration, we're basically looking at that and saying, what were they worth to us? What are they worth to us now? And then on the sort of thematic and insight level, how much of their churn can we attribute to a specific user need that popped up in some piece of feedback they gave us, whether they gave us a survey response and they wrote a few things in there and they said, we have to assess, all right, well, how much of this churn was attributable to these things? If it's like a support ticket, we're still working on bringing that to the live platform, but working on that integration. If it's a support ticket and then they churned immediately after that, we have to look at, all right, well, was the support ticket resolved adequately? Did the user indicate that that it worked out well? Was there an NPS survey or a customer CSAT survey after the support ticket was closed where they gave a good score or a bad score? So that's a very complex one, but we're doing that to be as precise as we can in our estimate of how much of a particular cost of churn was attributable to a particular specific user need. And then, of course, at this high level, this company level you're seeing here is more just a general, this is how much you've lost across all of these user needs. That balances itself out a bit with the total projected risk to ARR here. So total projected risk to ARR is the most complex one we calculate currently. I'm not going to go into a lot of excruciating detail, but roughly we're taking into account things like how old the data feedback is. So if it's like a 2-year-old survey, obviously we're not counting that at all in this value. We're taking into account the probability to churn of that particular customer who gave that piece of feedback. So if you're providing that from your CRM, that's great. It's usually a 0 to 1 decimal or a percentage. If you are not giving us that and you give us enough historical data, we can actually calculate one for a particular customer ourselves in the system, which is fantastic. We'll use that. We weight that, a little bit differently depending on how authoritative that is. And we do ask you, if you provide that value, that probability to churn value, how long is this predictive for? Because most of the time, if you build something in BigQuery, it has like a 2-week predictive power, 1-month predictive power. Beyond that, it's going to get a little bit more questionable, but it just depends on your model and how authoritative it is and how much confidence you have in it. Now, these two here, total projected risk to ARR and realized loss to ARR, they balance each other out because it tells you whether the majority of the risk is in the past or in the future. So if you see like a specific user need and you say, oh, there's a huge value for realized loss to ARR, but a very small value for projected risk to ARR for this particular user need, it could be that either you solved that user need and so it's not a problem anymore, or it could mean that the market just moved on. Either way, it's not something that you have to address as much as if it was the other way around, where you have a high projected risk to ARR. And I know this is getting a little wonky, a little bit complicated, but hopefully you see where the value of having both of these together can give you a lot of intel into whether you should bother addressing something. And then the estimated revenue opportunity here is the addition of the projected risk to ARR with the potential conversion gains, right? So we're saying if you do this thing, you're going to make this much more money. Now, those two things, sometimes there's some of both in a particular user need, but a lot of times it's sort of one or the other. So like if there's an onboarding issue, or say there's a sign-up form issue, or there's a email issue, a demo issue, free trial issue, those might be impacting the conversion gain side of things, but they won't really impact people that already use the product. You might have other issues which people can't even access within the application itself. That's only going to impact the people that are projected risk to ARR. It's not going to impact conversions, right? So they tend to be heavily weighted one way or the other, but sometimes it's both. As far as the confidence in here, if you go over here to the estimated revenue opportunity, you can see it's 5.2 million shown, but there's a range displayed here, right? So 3.1 million to 7.2 million. That's based on how much confidence we have in a given metric. And this range is shown, you can find this range across all the levels of, again, the products, the organization, the themes, and the insights sub-themes. They all have these same metrics. They all have the same confidence calculations, the same ranges. As you get more data, that range gets smaller because we have more confidence in the estimates. And if you decide, hey, I really feel like all these are too high, too low, we talked about this in another video, you have control over that. You can make it more optimistic, you can make it more conservative. We tend to be pretty conservative by default because we assume that there's lots of things, lots of factors into a person converting or not converting, churning or not churning, beyond what we have from them in the form of our user interviews or our survey responses, our sales call. There's other things going on in their life that we can't see. And so we don't want to ascribe all of the value of these things to the user needs that are expressed in those particular pieces of data that we bring in. And if I jump over here to these graphs, you can start to see that we have some of these things already populated in here. Again, it's a synthetic data set, but if I go here, I go to, say, Beams. Okay, we can see that this is a slow, resource-heavy, and laggy across devices is our number one user need, right? So it's way out in front, and it has a churn risk to ARR of $342,000. So that's going to be across the duration of the probability of churn that we particularly have, extrapolated out to 1 year. So this is a 1-year estimate. It's going to cost $342,000 not to fix this. Makes it really easy, sort of a no-brainer for this product manager to choose to prioritize this particular user need in some way and find ways to do that. So you can also customize these. You can create new charts, all sorts of different chart types, data sources, very flexible. We'll go into that in a different video. But I wanted to jump over to the insight side and show you just quickly. Let's go to, again, we'll go to Beams here. And looks like I had seams and then beams. So product beams, we have our insight name, our summary, and you can see all these same metrics here, right? So ARR risk, $76,000, the range, $32,000 to $120,000. So again, in here, we can see all of the same sort of data. So you get used to that pattern and you get to understand, all right, this is the type of data I have. I can view it at different levels of abstraction from specific user need all the way up to the company. And then you can say, all right, well, I don't have LTV here. I don't need to see that. I don't have account size. Hit apply, and you can reduce this down, simplify it a bit. There's a lot more in here. I'll go into a different video, but your solutions, quotes, your JIRA linking, your ability to remove samples from a particular insight and reassign them. You can reprocess them, reassign them to a different insight, remove it entirely. There's all sorts of fun things in there. But the last part I'll touch on here is that you can also combine insights into features, which you can then prioritize, right? So user insights can be linked to a Jira if you want something more specific. But if you want to do something higher level and bigger, you can link this to an Epic or whatever it is. You can build this feature out, prioritize it. And when you pull it over to Jira, it's going to pull with it all of the metrics that come. So you can see risk to revenue is here, revenue opportunity is here. There's a competitive tag because when you enter your product information initially, we're going out and finding your competitors if we're able to, and then doing a full assessment of them, their strengths or weaknesses. And we look at that relative to what we see as your weaknesses in your product based on the data that we have from your users. So we're able to say, all right, this is kind of something that's going to catch you up to the competition, or this is something that's going to innovate you past the competition. Whatever that is, we give you this tag here to tell you that. And of course, this is also can be linked to Jira's. We suggest ones to you. We can generate solution requirements for you, all that fun stuff. Bi-directional commenting here. So if you leave a comment here, it'll show up in the comments in the Jira that's linked. If you leave a comment in the Jira that's linked, it'll show up here. Fun stuff like that. I'm going to stop here. Let me know if you have any questions. I think that it's a really powerful system. It is very reliable. Last thing I'll touch on here. Data health, this is a very high level, but you can see here we've researched 1,213 people. So we've gathered data from that sample. Our active users is 70,000. That's the cohort, or that's the population, sorry. And then, your history duration. We put a lot of other metrics into the calculation of your overall data health score. But even with 1,200 people here, you can see we're still only at 52% data health. It would be good to get that up so that those margins, those ranges here that you see in the tooltips can get smaller and smaller. And you can be more and more precise. So thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.